I, Daniel Mercer, walked into court, cameras flashing, expecting public humiliation. It was a winter morning that tasted like damp concrete and bitter salt. My mother sat in severe black, dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Beside her, my brother wore the easy smirk he saved for people he intended to ruin. I felt the heat of the bulbs on my neck. I waited for the shame to start until the judge asked one question that made my father freeze. My brother smirked eye, and their lawyer turned paper. White. Elena Marquez marched ahead of me, her shoes clicking against the pristine marble. She carried 3 heavy banker boxes, like they were filled with nothing but dust. The lobby smelled of expensive cologne and legal stationery. My father stood near the security checkpoint, shaking hands with wealthy donors. He was turning my ruin into a networking event. He didn't even look at me as I passed. He was too busy posing for an invisible oil portrait. Behind us, the courthouse doors locked with a heavy, final thud. The courtroom air was thin and overly sanitized. I sat at the defendant's table and stared at the wood grain. Across the aisle, my brother Colton leaned back with practiced ease. He believed he already owned my company. His lawyer, Gideon Price, arranged his documents with smug surgical precision. The gallery was packed with reporters ready to record my bankruptcy. They wanted the story of the failed son. I felt the cold pressure of a secret I had guarded for 8 long, lonely years. The judge cleared his throat, a sound like dry leaves skittering over stone. He didn't look at the fraudulent bankruptcy petition. Instead, he stared directly at the routing number, listed on the main exhibit. The room went perfectly silent as he leaned forward. He asked why the transfer code matched a restricted federal infrastructure account. My father's hand began to tremble on the railing. It was the first time I saw his saintly mask slip. The judge wasn't following their script. He was tracking the money. Elena slid a single sheet of paper across the smooth table. It was the forensic analysis of the signature they had forged. She didn't say a word, letting the silence amplify the weight of the evidence. My mother's face went pale as she realized we had tracked her expired notary seal. The drama they manufactured was dissolving into a criminal record. Colton tried to stand, but his knees seemed to buckle. The legal machinery they built to crush me was suddenly turning against its own creators. The judge ordered the bailiff to secure the doors. This was no longer a civil hearing about a missing loan. It was a federal inquiry into wire fraud and corporate espionage. My father looked at me, and for once, he saw me. He didn't see a mechanic or a failure. He saw the architect of his own downfall. I didn't smile or gloat. I simply adjusted my tie and waited for the police to arrive. The truth was finally louder than their lies. My father finally started to scream. The bailiff blocked the mahogany doors as the air in the room curdled. My father slumped against the polished rail, his perfect posture finally shattered. The judge didn't blink while he stared at the encrypted routing slip. He knew the numbers weren't just random digits. They were a fingerprint for a specific federal treasury account. Colton reached for his leather briefcase with trembling fingers. His smirk was buried under a mask of pure terror. The predator was finally the prey. Gideon Price whispered frantically into my father's ear, but Reed didn't move. He looked at the heavy banker boxes on our table, like they held his execution order. Elena stood calmly, her hands resting on the smooth wood. She didn't need to shout to dominate the room. The silence was heavy and suffocating. I watched the court, reporters' fingers dance across the keys. Every panicked breath was now a permanent part of the record. My father looked old. The judge leaned into his microphone, his voice cutting through the rising murmurs. He demanded a clear explanation for the source of the alleged loan. Colton tried to speak, but his voice cracked on the first syllable. He looked at the back row where Trent Caldwell sat frozen. Their secret channel was wide open for the world to see. I felt a cold surge of victory in my chest. The trap was shut. They had no way out. Elena pulled a second document from the box, a thick technical manual. It was the internal security log for the hospital's main server. She pointed to a specific timestamp that matched the morning's fake trustee request. The judge adjusted his glasses and studied the IP address. It originated from the Holston Ridge corporate headquarters. My father's lawyer turned an even deeper shade of white. The hacking attempt wasn't just a rumor. It was a digital trail leading home. The back of my neck burned as the gallery erupted in hushed whispers. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Sensing a massive scandal, my sister Blair tried to slip toward the exit, but the bailiff raised a hand. No one was allowed to leave until the record was clear. I felt the weight of 8 years finally lifting from my shoulders. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the truth. The Holston name was burning. Reed stood up suddenly, his face twisted into a mask of desperate rage. He pointed a finger at me, accusing me of sabotaging his legacy. The judge slammed his gavel down, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He warned my father to sit or face immediate contempt. My mother buried her face in her hands, her silk handkerchief soaked through. She knew the expired seal was a felony. The saintly family was a house of mirrors. Everything shattered. The judge turned his attention to the court clerk and issued a direct order. He wanted the federal marshals informed of an ongoing security breach. I looked at Trent, who was now being escorted toward the front. He looked like a man who was ready to trade every secret for a lighter sentence. Elena touched my elbow and offered a small, knowing nod. We weren't done yet. A new shadow appeared in the doorway. It was the FBI. The FBI agents stood like granite pillars against the oak paneling. Their presence turned the courtroom into a pressure cooker. Reed Holston sat down slowly, his face drained of its usual bronze glow. He looked at the federal badges and then at his own trembling hands. My father always believed he was above the law. He thought his name was a shield against any consequence. Now the shield was melting. The room felt smaller with every passing second. The lead agent stepped forward and handed a folder to the judge. He didn't look at my family. He looked at the boxes Elena had brought. Those boxes contained the proof of the Scarsdale embezzlement. The judge opened the folder and scanned the top page. His expression went from stern to icy in a heartbeat. He looked at the federal agents and nodded once. The air grew heavy. Something massive was about to break wide open. Elena opened a laptop and turned the screen toward the bench. She showed the judge the real time server logs from my company. We had been tracking the mole's movements for hours. The digital trail didn't stop at my brother's office. It tunneled deeper into the Holston Ridge primary servers. The hacking attempt on the hospital was launched through a secondary VPN. They were using my own infrastructure to hide their crimes. It was a digital suicide note. Colton tried to stand, but his knees hit the table with a dull thud. He looked at Trent Caldwell, who was already whispering to a junior agent. The betrayal was coming from both sides now. My brother's smirk was gone, replaced by a frantic, sweating panic. He looked like a child caught in a storm he couldn't control. He reached for his phone, but a bailiff stepped closer. Every avenue of escape was being sealed. The judge cleared his throat and addressed the room. He stated that the bankruptcy petition was a secondary concern now. The primary issue was the attempted interference with a critical life support system. He looked at my father and asked, Who authorized the hospital hack? Reed opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was a man who lived for optics and power. In this light, he looked like a common thief. The mask was gone. I stood up and looked my father in the eye. I didn't feel the old fear or the need for his approval. I only felt a cold, sharp clarity. I told the judge that the $2,400,000 was never a loan. It was the exact amount Reed had stolen from his own clients. My brother filed the petition to cover the hole in their books. The courtroom erupted in a sudden roar of voices. The secret was out. The judge slammed his gavel down 3 times. He ordered my father and brother to stay where they were. The FBI agents moved toward the defense table, with silver handcuffs glinting. My mother started to sob, the silk handkerchief finally falling to the floor. I looked at Alina, and she gave me a tired smile. We had won the battle, but the war was changing. The agent in the back was staring at me. He had my file. The FBI agent with the file stepped toward our table. He ignored the gasping reporters and the chaos near the benches. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Elena folded her laptop slowly, her gaze fixed on the man. He wasn't looking for my father anymore. He stopped inches from me and laid a heavy hand on the banker boxes. The air in the courtroom felt freezing. He finally looked at me with cold eyes. I watched the silver handcuffs close around my brother's wrists. Colton didn't fight or shout. He just stared at the floor as the life he loved vanished. My father sat like a stone statue while the agents searched his coat. The shame was a physical weight in the small room. I thought this was the end of the long nightmare. I thought I was finally free of their shadows. Then the agent opened his dark file. He pulled out a series of internal documents from my own firm. They were dated months before the bankruptcy filing. I saw technical schematics for the hospital's primary control grid. My handwriting was scrawled across the margins in blue ink. I didn't remember signing those specific pages. Alina leaned in, her breath hitching as she scanned the lines. These weren't just designs. They were instructions for the hack. Someone had set me up. The judge called for order, his voice booming over the noise. He looked at the new evidence with a deep frown. The agent stated that my credentials were used for the breach. He wasn't just investigating my father's theft anymore. He was looking at the architect of the system. My knees felt weak as the realization hit me. The mole had gone much deeper than I feared. They had stolen my identity. The trap was shifting. Alina grabbed the agent's arm and demanded to see the headers. She knew the digital signature had to be a fake. The agent pulled back, his face a mask of professional duty. He said the logs were verified by the national security team. My father looked up, a slow and twisted grin forming. Even in handcuffs, he was finding a way to win. He had planted a backdoor in my life. I was the suspect. I looked at the judge and tried to speak. My throat felt like it was filled with dry sand. He told me to sit down and stay quiet. The FBI agents began to surround my chair. I saw my mother watching me with a strange, blank expression. She wasn't crying anymore. She looked like she was waiting for a signal. I realized the Scarsdale rejection was just the beginning. They had planned this for years. I was trapped. The lead agent leaned down and whispered in my ear. He told me that my private server had been accessed. He mentioned a name I hadn't heard in a decade. It was the man who taught me how to code. My father's old partner was the one who built the back door. This wasn't just a family war. It was a corporate execution. I looked at the exit and saw the shadow. Evan Pike was back. The shadow in the doorway moved with a familiar, predatory grace. Evan Pike stepped into the courtroom light, looking like a ghost in an expensive suit. He didn't look at the agents or the gallery. He stared directly at me with a cold, triumphant smile. My father gave a sharp, imperceptible nod from his seat. The architect of my ruin was finally standing in the room. I felt the walls closing in as the FBI tightened their perimeter. Alina stood up, her palms flat on the oak table. She demanded the court recognize Evan as a hostile party. The judge ignored her, focused instead on the federal files. Evan approached the bench and offered a single silver thumb drive. He claimed it contained proof of my direct involvement in the hospital breach. I saw the drive and felt a sick chill in my gut. It was a custom hardware key I thought I lost years ago. The lead agent plugged the drive into the court's computer system. A series of private chat logs appeared on the large monitors. They showed a user with my private handle discussing system vulnerabilities. The messages were dated 3 months ago, during the peak rollout. My brother Colton leaned back, his panic replaced by a dark, knowing calm. They had been building this digital cage for a long time. The evidence against me looked absolutely perfect. I looked at the timestamps and noticed a tiny, flickering anomaly. The server latency didn't match my office's actual fiber connection speed. I whispered the detail to Alina, and her eyes suddenly sharpened. She pulled a network diagnostic report from her banker box. We compared the ping rates in the logs to our real data. The messages were coming from a localized server, not the cloud. It was a simulated environment built to frame me. Elena slammed her hand down, drawing the judge's immediate attention. She pointed at the latency discrepancies on the glowing screen. Evan Pike's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He knew I had caught the technical flaw in his work. I stood up and addressed the judge with steady, freezing clarity. I explained that the logs were forged inside a sandbox environment. This wasn't a hack. It was a movie made of fake data. The judge ordered the federal technician to verify the ping. The silence in the room became heavy and dangerous. My father began to sweat, his eyes darting toward the exits. The technician typed rapidly, his face illuminated by the blue monitor. He looked up and confirmed that the logs were local fabrications. The FBI agent moved his hand away from his holster. The tide was turning, but Evan wasn't running. He was laughing. Evan reached into his coat and pulled out a small remote. He told the room that the real hack started now. My phone buzzed with a notification that the hospital backup power was failing. The courtroom lights flickered once and then turned bright red. Evan hadn't just come to frame me in court. He had come to finish the job they started in Scarsdale. The judge's gavel hit the wood, but no one was listening. The emergency lights cast a bloody glow over the shocked gallery. Evan Pike held the small remote like a detonator, while a jagged alarm wailed through the corridors. My objective was clear. I had to kill the connection before the hospital's primary generators failed. I lunged for my laptop, but the lead FBI agent blocked my path with a stiff arm. He didn't know who to trust in the chaos. The red strobe light turned every movement into a stuttering nightmare. Elena Marquez didn't hesitate or wait for permission. She swung a heavy banker box onto the table and pulled out a ruggedized tablet. It was the emergency override I built for exactly this scenario. The screen flickered to life, showing a rapid cascade of critical system failures. The hospital's life Support interface was being flooded with malicious packets. Evan watched us with a calm, terrifying intensity. He knew he had the advantage of speed. He had already bypassed the external firewalls. I shouted at the technician to bridge my tablet to the court's fiber line. The judge was standing now, his gavel forgotten on the bench. He ordered the bailiffs to disarm Evan, but the remote was tethered to a dead man's switch. If they moved too fast, the connection would sever, instantly shutting down every ventilator in the state hospital network. My hands shook as I typed the initial handshake commands. I was fighting through a thick digital fog. The pressure was physical. My lungs felt tight. Suddenly, the screen changed from red to a brilliant, sharp green. A hidden back door opened, but it wasn't Evan's. It belonged to the mole, Trent Caldwell. He had left his session active on a secondary port. I realized Trent hadn't just been selling data. He had been trying to build his own escape route from the Holston family's control. I hijacked his credentials and diverted the packet flood into a localized sinkhole. The hospital's heart rate monitor stabilized. Evan's smile finally vanished as the remote in his hand began to beep. He realized the connection was being swallowed by a superior logic. He looked at my father, who was staring at the floor in pure defeat. The power balance had shifted in a single, desperate minute. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was taking control of their entire infrastructure. I locked every Holston Ridge account with a single stroke. The red lights stopped flashing. The courtroom fell into a heavy, ringing silence. The emergency sirens faded into a distant, muffled hum. The lead agent lowered his weapon and looked at my screen. He saw the stabilized vitals from the Metro Care Center. The judge sat back down, his face aged by the sudden violence. He asked if the threat was neutralized. I nodded, my eyes never leaving Evan Pike. He was trapped in the room he tried to burn. The FBI moved in. The agents tackled Evan before he could press another button. They stripped the remote from his hand and pinned him to the marble floor. My brother Colton began to wail, a thin and pathetic sound. He realized the criminal charges just became life sentences. My father didn't make a sound. He just watched the silver handcuffs click shut around Evan's wrists. The theater was finally over. The true cost of the Scarsdale rejection was laid bare. Reed Hostin stood up slowly, looking at the judge with empty eyes. He tried to claim he was a victim of Evan's radicalism. The judge didn't even look at him. He was too busy reading the new data logs I had just surfaced. Those logs showed every payment my father made to Evan over the last decade. It wasn't a recent alliance. It was a long-term conspiracy to monopolize the region's grid. The paper trail was absolute. I looked at my mother, who was still clutching her soaked handkerchief. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and sudden, desperate pride. It was too late for that. I turned away and started packing my tablet into its leather case. I had promised to tell the truth, and the truth had destroyed them. The courthouse was quiet now, except for the sound of boots on marble. I felt the secret of Scarsdale leave my body. The lead agent tapped me on the shoulder. Slept. He didn't have a file this time. He had a mobile phone with a secure line. He told me the Secretary of Infrastructure wanted to speak with me immediately. My heart skipped a beat as I took the device. This wasn't just about survival anymore. The world knew what I could do. I stepped into the hallway and saw the media waiting. A new shadow was standing by the elevator. It was time to see if the law was truly on my side. The shadow by the elevator was the hospital's CIO. Looking shaken but resolute, I clutched the secure phone while the FBI began clearing the courtroom. My primary goal was to secure the bridge between the hospital and the grid permanently. The agents were ushering my family toward a secure holding area. I felt the vibration of the city outside through the thick marble. The adrenaline was fading into a deep, bone-aching fatigue. Then the CIO pointed toward the back stairs. Someone else had escaped the room. I pushed through the heavy doors and found the stairwell empty and cold. I needed to find Trent Caldwell before he vanished into the Manhattan crowd. He was the only one who could verify the secondary encryption keys. The hospital systems were stable, but the lock was temporary. I heard a frantic scraping sound 2 flights below me. I didn't wait for the elevator or the agents. I took the stairs 3 at a time. My shoes echoed like hammer strikes on the metal. Trent was huddling in the dark corner of the parking garage. He held his phone like a weapon, the screen glowing bright blue. He looked at me with the eyes of a trapped animal. I didn't move closer, keeping the distance between us neutral. He told me that my father had a backup server in New Jersey. It wasn't just about the money or the grid anymore. It was about a hidden database of every client. My father had been selling access for years. Everything was compromised. I demanded the administrative password for the New Jersey site immediately. Trent hesitated, his thumb hovering over the delete key on his device. He knew this was his only leverage against the federal prosecutors. I told him the hospital was safe because of his active session. I promised to tell the judge he helped at the end. He took a shallow breath and typed a long string of characters. He handed me the phone with a trembling hand. The balance of power was finally mine. The New Jersey server was a digital graveyard of corporate secrets. I logged in and saw the map of the entire tri-state area. Every substation and water treatment plant was listed in high detail. It was a roadmap for a total infrastructure collapse. My father hadn't just been a thief. He was an architect of chaos. I saw the recurring payments from foreign entities in the ledger. The scope of the betrayal was global. I felt a cold dread settle in my gut. I used the secure line to call the secretary back. I explained that we needed a total system purge across 3 states. The scale of the work was massive and immediate. She asked if I could lead the recovery effort myself. I looked at the dark garage and the broken man before me. I told her I would do it, but on my terms. I wanted the Holston name erased from every contract. I wanted a clean slate for the city. The federal agents swarmed the garage a moment later, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. They took Trent into custody without any struggle or noise. I walked back toward the main lobby, my head spinning. The media was still waiting behind the yellow crime scene tape. They wanted a statement from the hero of the hour. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a survivor who had just found a deeper rot. The courthouse was a crime scene. Inside the holding cell, my brother Colton was screaming about his rights. My father sat in the corner, staring at the concrete floor. He looked at me through the glass, his eyes devoid of any remorse. He whispered that I would never be one of them. I leaned toward the speaker and told him he was right. I was something much better. I was the person who was going to rebuild everything he broke. He turned his head away. My mother approached the glass, her face a mask of ruined makeup. She asked if there was any way to save the family firm. I told her the firm was already dead. It died the moment they decided to target the hospital. She looked at the handcuffs on her wrists and finally understood. The silk handkerchief was gone, replaced by cold steel. There was no more theater left to perform. The play was over. The lights were finally coming up. The lead agent handed me my banker boxes, now tagged as federal evidence. He told me I was needed at the command center in Brooklyn. I walked out the front doors and the cameras flashed again. This time, I didn't look for a way to hide. I stood on the steps and looked at the sky. The winter air was sharp and clean. I felt the secret leave me for good. Then my phone buzzed with an unknown signal. Someone was watching. The unknown signal on my phone pulsed with rhythmic precision. I stood on the courthouse steps, while the wind tore at my coat. My objective was to vanish into the Brooklyn Command Center. However, the crowd of reporters surged forward like a breaking wave. They screamed questions about the New Jersey servers and the global betrayal. I felt a hand on my shoulder, firm and cold. It was the lead FBI agent again. He looked toward a black sedan idling at the curb. We moved through the press line as flashes turned the world white. The sedan door opened, revealing a laptop glowing with a familiar interface. It was my own administrative dashboard for the grid shield. Slept. I realized then that my privacy was a total illusion. The federal government had already mapped my heart and my code. I sat in the plush leather seat and stared at the data. The driver remained silent as we merged into the heavy Manhattan traffic. My life was changing. The drive across the bridge felt like a crossing into a different life. I looked at the city skyline and saw the power grid as a living thing. My father's greed had left scars on every transformer and wire. I accessed the New Jersey backup and began the final purge. The foreign accounts flickered and died as I deleted the back doors. I felt a strange sense of loss for the boy from Scarsdale. That person was dead. I was the architect now. We arrived at the Brooklyn facility, a windowless brick fortress near the docks. Inside, a dozen monitors displayed the tree, state recovery status. I met the secretary, who looked tired but held a sharp gaze. She asked if I could truly fix the rot my father created. I showed her the new encryption layers I had just deployed. We were building a wall that no Holston could ever climb. My hands were steady. The lie was finally becoming the truth. The work lasted for hours as we scrubbed the legacy systems. I watched the foreign signatures vanish from the ledger one by one. By dawn, the tri-state area was finally clean and secure. I walked out to the loading dock and watched the sun rise over the water. Elena was waiting by her car, holding 2 cups of bitter coffee. She told me the indictments were being processed. My family was officially history. The war was over. I was finally free. I took a sip of the coffee and felt the heat settle in my chest. My phone buzzed again, with that same unknown signal from the courthouse. I opened the message and saw a single image of my childhood home. There was a red circle around the library window where it all began. Beneath the photo, a single line of text appeared in blue. It said that the Scarsdale Library was only the first room. Someone was still inside the house.